right. Welcome, everyone. We've got a bit of a special episode here, a bit of a crossover going on. This is Lowlands Wargaming, but this is also the Green Dragon podcast. Welcome,
Hello,
everyone.
hello. Yeah, it should be a banger of a collab because we had a banger of a game.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm Kevin from Lowlands Wargaming, joined by Kylie from the Green Dragon podcast. So if you're listening, you can also watch this on Lowlands Wargaming. If you're watching this, you can also listen to this content on the Green Dragon podcast because we're going to be uploading the same thing onto both channels and do a bit of a collab that way.
Yeah,
So
should be good. Should be good.
yeah, amazing. So today we have something in store for you. We're going to talk about the Masters at Ardacon. Kylie and I both participated. We had an absolute banger of a game that we'll go over in detail. It was an absolute joy to play against you. But maybe it's also nice for our viewers and our listeners to talk about the general experience of the Masters of Ardacon because it's not something that a lot of people can
Mm,
attend. And I think it's a pretty special event and special atmosphere that will be interesting to talk a bit about and share our experiences. But before we get into too much detail, maybe Kylie, could you give a short introduction about of yourself for the people that haven't seen or heard of you before?
yeah. Well, I'm Kylie. I'm one of the infamous voices of the Green Dragon. So I've been playing the game for too long now. I've been playing since first edition, like Fellowship era, kind of deal. Kind of getting pretty deep into the Lord of the Rings because that's how I got into it. Big fan of Lord of the Rings. Read the books when I was a kid. Found the game. Went, oh, this seems like up my alley. And then yeah, just kind of slowly consumed my entire life. And then yeah, tournaments just suddenly become a natural thing when you're playing the game. And after a while, the community just slowly started to build. And then suddenly I'm attending international tournaments. So that's a linear curve, surely.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for a really long time. Have you ever had like
Really long
a
time.
break, or have you been gaming pretty much for 20 years
No,
now?
no, it's been 20 years straight through, non-stop, ever since I was like, I think it was 11 when I started. I think that's when the game came out. 11 or 12. I was in grade six. And yeah, it's been one thing of like there's been some times when I've like not played as much because there haven't been as many players around me. But once I found a gaming club like 2 hours away from me though, which is kind of weird that I was traveling 2 hours like weekly to go play games, and that my dad was okay with that and cool with that and letting me travel and taking me to those. So like, shout out to dad, whether you are up there. So yeah, it's one of those things of like once you find that core group of friends and gamers that you just kind of suddenly you're helping them move and they're helping you sort out your shit for going overseas. So yeah, it's nothing I would ever trade in any way, shape, or form. It's been a great like journey, especially to get to kind of the last few years where like the competitive scene has just exploded in terms of like how many people are getting involved now.
Yeah. So would you say that the scene now is better than it used to be in Australia?
Definitely, definitely. So like key point was like way back in like I think it was like 20. I'm gonna say like 2012 or something around there. I think 2013, 2014. Me and my friend Josh, we traveled up to Sydney for a tournament called Clash of the Titans, which was like a big deal because like no one really at that point traveled interstate to tournaments because like Australia's really big. It takes freaking forever to get to anywhere. So when we rocked up, everyone was like, "Holy crap, we have Victorians here! Like what?" And then we played the tournament. I managed to win that tournament too, like somehow getting through it back in the old days when people were proxying Treebeard as Bayonne because Bayonne didn't exist, and LA matrices were things of the past. So you had all sorts of wacky combinations, Theoden just leading random Ministerial Warriors and stuff like that. So played that tournament, had a blast with it, and then yeah, everyone trying to share contact information, and then from that one moment, that one interaction, our community page popped up on Facebook. The forum started popping off because everyone started to know each other, and then slowly but surely the fires like spread all up the east coast and eventually all the way to Perth. And we now have a pretty tight knit, national wide community that will go support each other's events and stuff. So it's been great and great for our hobby to grow it because we really needed that connection in our own country. Because like we're not in Europe, we don't have like, France next door where we can just, go and play in another tournament next weekend. We have to kind of really wait like a month or two before the next big event shows up because we're just so small,
Yeah, yeah,
so spread out.
yeah. Well, you're not small. You're spread out, right? It's a distance that
Yeah.
kills you. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because we had a similar thing happen here in the Netherlands where COVID kind of reinvigorated the hobby in a weird way because I myself
Interesting.
am one of the many players that picked the hobby up again during COVID. So I used
Hmm.
to play like you when I was like I think 11 or 12 years old when the magazines came out, etc. But I stopped and I didn't play for 15, maybe 17 years or something like that. And I picked the
Yeah.
hobby back
Wow.
up. And then around that time, somebody started a Discord server for the Netherlands. And then slowly but surely, we've been like integrating every little community that has been in different cities because they used to be like little hubs of players that would just play games together or do
Mm.
small tournaments. But now we're getting bigger and bigger and more frequent tournaments in the Netherlands, which has really helped, shape up the competitive players as well because they used to be quite tied to like the Rotterdam area or there would
Yeah.
be a group around Utrecht. And these cities are only half an hour apart, but they would stay in their own local groups because they had their WhatsApp group and that's just where the communication
Yeah.
was. And the Discord server is what it took to kind of knit all of that together. And
Yeah.
we're at the
That's
point now
so
where we're,
cool.
we're selling out like 50 player tournaments that aren't even like GTs or anything. It's just like, hey, we're organizing a tournament and we have the space, and it's like sold out. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's really
That's
nice.
that's so cool. That's so kind of like heartwarming to know that like some of the growing pains that we went through are still happening in the other side of the world and still flourishing in the same kind of ways. It's kind of amazing like to hear that. And I don't think it's just the Netherlands too. Like I've heard stories from the US community and the Canadian community as well, like similar kind of fires being relit during COVID, which is really interesting. You would think that COVID would kill the hobby, but for some reason it did the opposite.
Well, I can't speak for other people, but for myself, it was really a case of all of my other hobbies were impossible during COVID. And I
Mm,
was going stir crazy from just sitting behind a screen all day because I would be doing that for work. I would be in the same room, and then in the evening, all I could do was play games, but that would be on the same machine that I used to work from home in the same room.
yeah.
That was just no. And then I was like, oh, I was playing miniature games with a friend of mine that I recently picked up was Warhammer Underworlds. And I was like, well, we used to play Lord of the Rings as well. That was really fun. And I think I still have some stuff at my parents, and I just kind of escalated from there. I just got these
Yeah.
old minis that I painted like almost 20 years ago, and I'm like, oh my god, this is horrible. But yeah, it was
Yeah, some of those old videos are very hit and miss. Some of them are like absolutely like how have they not had an update? Classically, I think the old school like high elf bowmen and swordsmen and like the Moria goblins are just they're just trash tier.
Oh yeah, no.
Just
So
trash
I
tier
I
models.
I had some painted Moria goblins and I had some unpainted ones as well from the stuff from my parents. I my first project was, well, let's paint some Moria goblins and see how well I can do
Yeah.
now versus how well I did back then. And already massive improvement just from like modern techniques and materials and
Yeah.
whatever, and just being an adult rather than a teenager who has no idea what the hell
Mm.
he's doing. That also helps.
Yes, that is true. I can definitely say that some of my old models are a bit cringy to look at. I think
Like the goblin
specifically my
green
metal.
bases.
Yeah. Oh, the Goblin Green bases. Oh, that's a throwback and a half.
Right.
I did find some of my really old, like really really old metal orcs, and went, oh no, I can't let anyone see these, and ended up just throwing them in the acetone and stripping them and redoing them. Because I'm like, yeah, these were bad. Like they were a Christmas gift from my dad from way back when. It was like, oh, these are new, aren't they? I was like, yeah, I guess. I don't really play orcs though,
Yeah.
but
Well, I mean, the
this is
metal
where we
orcs are
are.
also like precious enough that I would also probably
Yeah,
strip them and redo them. But I've
yeah,
also got like Warriors of Ministry that I painted 20 years ago. I'm just keeping them. I'm not playing with them usually unless I need an
yeah,
extraordinary amount of them. But just kind of nostalgic. I don't really want to strip them
yeah,
or anything. I'm just gonna keep them, and
yeah.
it's a testament to how far we've come as a hobby as a whole, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to like to look back to on like 20-year-old paint jobs and like look at what you've done now and go, yeah, wow, there is a marked improvement here
Yeah,
in technique and
yeah.
ability.
Well, it's not just in
Um,
personal skill. It's also, the hobby as a whole. If you look at Golden Demon winners from 20 years ago,
yeah,
you're like, I could do that. But if you
yeah,
look at Golden Demon winners now, I'm like, never,
no,
never in my
nope,
life.
nope, hard, hard, hard pass, hard
Yeah,
pass. Plus, I've seen some of the techniques. I've seen because Jeremy's done some models that are golden dim quality, and every time I was like, "How did you do that?" He's like, I just paint." He's like, that's whole Jeremy's
I,
whole thing is he paints.
I
That's the thing
wish.
he
I
loves more
wish.
than anything else. And
Well,
like,
we've got Louis
yeah,
from Belgium that is kind of on that level here. I think he paints an average of 30 or 30 something hours a week, and he basically wins
that's
best
insane.
painted at any event he goes to. Because
Yeah,
that's also why he goes to international events, just to win best painted. The man's crazy. He's really good at
yeah.
painting.
The,
Anyway,
the other thing that always like blows my mind as well with the painting is how quick they get.
yes,
Because like that was the one thing I've seen Jeremy like paint a golem like amazingly in like 20 minutes.
yeah.
I'm like, how'd you do that in 20
Yeah.
minutes?
Like
He's
you
like,
watch channels like Squidminer, like, oh, I did this paint job in 2 hours, and I'm like, mate, that this would cost me like 2 months to do onto that level. Like,
yeah,
how on
yeah,
earth? It's just they're so confident. Anyway, so we're getting a little bit off track here. Let's go back
a
to
little,
the
a little.
Masters. This year you participated in the Masters at Ardacon. How'd you
Mhm.
qualify?
So I had to qualify through that same tournament that I mentioned earlier, Clash of the Titans. That was the tournament we picked way back when, as the Australian community, as was going to be our like our entry point because it was the biggest tournament we had, and it was the tournament that had the most, particularly the most in-state representation. So we figured that would be the best thing, which is kind of ironic now because we have other tournaments like Masters and Cell that are now bigger than what Clash is. So there's this like awkward thing of like, do we move the ticket across to a different tournament? But we're still keeping it at Clash for now. And yeah, that was a bit of a slugfest to me. I ran the Dragon Emperor to that tournament and had to really fight my way through the pack to get there. We had like a group stage on day one, so you had your round robin between three other players, and then you got depending on how well you went, depends if you're like top of the half or bottom of the half going into day two. Made it to top half out of my group, and then yeah, kind of had to slog my way through the pack. And yeah, some of the matchups I had were really weird too. Like I was playing Hunter Orcs against one of our 40k national players who was just playing Lord of the Rings for shits and giggles, and that was a really tough game to like punch through and stuff. And I think the only reason why I got the win in that game was because my rules knowledge was just leaps and bounds beyond what he was used to. And then yeah, got the win there, and went well. I guess I requalify for Ardacon.
And then you had
Guess
to
I'll
come.
go. Yeah.
Basically, that's nice. Is there like do you have like a podcast episode on that tournament that people could listen to?
I do. Weirdly enough, I'm actually just before we started this call was editing it.
Ah,
Uh, so little spoiler alert or preamble is I do have an episode on Clash of the Titans from this year. It's a long time coming. We recorded that episode like way back in May. So getting it finally done and trying to get it out in my like spare time between flights and on trains and stuff has been a little side project and
all right.
stuff.
Well, you heard
So
it here first. That's the next one coming.
yep.
Amazing. All right. Well, I'll take the baton over for a
Yes, I
minute.
was gonna throw it to you and ask you the
I'm
same
just gonna
question,
grab
but
it.
you're just gonna grab it off me, do the proper hosting. So
Yes.
big thumbs up from me.
Sorry, this is also kind of what I do for a living. I'm like a
Yeah,
researcher, so I interview people all the time. So I'm kind of used to steering the conversation
yeah,
and making sure people keep on track and whatever.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, for those of you listening, my name's Kevin. I'm from the Netherlands, from Lowlands Wargaming. Like most people, over here I started with the little booklets, and we actually had translated booklets into Dutch. So I learned all of the rules in centimeters instead of inches way back when. That's a fun little detail. There's actually a few people that were still playing in centimeters like a year or so ago before they finally integrated into the rest of the community.
Wow,
Yeah, yeah,
wow.
yeah. Because if you're only ever
That's
playing with like a few
yeah.
friends and you're just using the old rules from way back when, you can do that. You can totally use
Mm,
centimeters, and there were like substitutes for all measurements and bases and things like that, which is kind of crazy.
mm.
Um, but yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I picked up the hobby again during COVID, and I went pretty hardcore really quickly with in terms of tournaments. I basically attended every single thing that I could in the Netherlands and learned really
Yeah.
quickly that way. I did attend Ardacon last year. That was my first major international event, so I didn't get my hopes up too much, but I did pretty well. We went undefeated on day one of the doubles, and then unfortunately lost two games, which meant we ended up sixth or seventh or something.
Yeah.
But we did defeat the people that ended up first and the people that ended up third. So we basically beat the
Well,
majority
yeah,
of the podium.
that's
So that was
that's
kind of
that's
cool.
that's a win right there.
Yeah, yeah. And then on the main event, I went two wins, one loss, and three draws, which was kind of crazy.
Three draw. You walked away with three.
Yes. Well,
I think
to be fair, one of them was an arranged draw because I went up against Evan Iverson in the final round and we weren't playing for any
yeah.
stakes anymore. And I'm not sure if you heard the stories, but last year Ardacon was in a heat wave and the air conditioning in the hotel was broken. So the floor at the end of the days was like 37, 38 degrees or something Celsius.
So
Uh,
my kind of weather.
yeah, so that's no fun after a full day
Mm.
of games. So we were both pretty much done, and I think it was to the death. So there were banner VPs. We couldn't get each other's banner. Uh, he was playing Angmar with Gullivar, and if I moved into him, that would have been losing proposition. If he moved into me, it would have been losing proposition. So we were kind of positioning for a draw anyways. So after like 20 minutes of that, I just kind of looked at him like, "Hey, do you want to just go for a drink and call it a draw? Because we're not playing for any stakes anymore." So we didn't go
Yeah.
to the full time, but it didn't matter anyways because we were like
Yeah.
60 place in the rankings or something. Like
Yeah.
it was whatever. But yeah, the other games were really good.
Plus, I imagine like the whole heat situation was probably got you to the point where you're like, I don't want to sit here for another
Oh,
hour,
absolutely.
40 minutes and just push models around.
Yeah, no, everybody was just sweating their ass off, and it was not fun. Like it was
Yeah.
fun, but it wasn't as fun as it could be. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It put a
Yeah.
kind of a damper on things. So this year was a lot better. Um, but yeah, so that was my first major international event, and I really enjoyed it. So I decided to also go to Belfast, which is how I qualified for the
Mm.
Masters. I joined Larry there, and when I saw the list that were posted and the people attending, there were 58, 56 players or something along those lines. I was
Yeah.
like, I think 25 of these could honestly take the top spot or at least compete for
Yeah.
podiums. Like there were some really solid players attending. So I didn't really expect to win the event. I was like hoping to be the best Emperor because there were like five Emperor players there. But I was kind of I don't know, I played really well, but I also was kind of lucky with matchups and scenario picks that most things lined up to the point where I'm like nothing was unwinnable.
Mm.
Like there were a few hard matchups, but it's also a really big part of the game.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you always need a tiny bit of luck to get that far in a tournament too. Like I can tell you, for instance, that my pod in Clash was a favorable pod for me and what I was running. So yeah, I totally get it. But I mean, you always take those, and you still have to convert the win at the end
yeah,
of the day too. So it's
yeah.
not a skillless, kind of walk in the park.
No, absolutely. And I mean, there were five other Emperor players out there, right, who had the same scenarios and
Yeah,
probably averaging similar matchups. So yeah, it's down to a little bit of luck, but also a lot of skill trying to
yeah,
make the most of it. So for people that are interested, I did do a full review of that event, so I won't go too much into detail of that during this little episode. But yeah, then I suddenly qualified. I didn't expect to, but I was like, okay, I guess I'm playing the Masters instead of the doubles event. So I had to tell my doubles partner to go find someone else to play with,
yeah,
which is always a fun
yeah,
conversation to have. Fortunately, the same day we found out that the person who had won the Dutch GT actually didn't plan on going to Ardacon, and the person that placed second was a Dutch player, so he got that ticket, which is why there were two Dutch
yeah,
players in the Masters, and our doubles partners just were like,
mm,
okay, guess we're playing together
yeah.
now. So that worked out in the end. So yeah, that's how we ended up in the Masters. So for the people that are unaware about what the Masters are, Kylie, you've got more Masters experience of the two of us. Could you maybe tell people
Well,
about it?
I do, but I think a very interesting point to make here is between the two Masters events I've attended was 2019 and 2023.
Hmm.
That's a 4 year gap, and the tournament structure and stuff has changed. So when I first played Masters, the first couple of years, it was knockout. One loss, you're out, you're done, and draws weren't possible because there was a tiebreaker for every scenario about what would happen if there was a draw. So I had to fight my way through this, round of 16 gauntlet, just having to throw haymakers at these really top quality players. And that was the one thing that did remain though was the sectioned off area. and playing against other players that really knew what they were doing. And I was really glad to see that not only had that remained at the Masters this year with us being up on the balcony, but that same quality of player had gone up, and the respect that everyone had for each other had also gone up. And it was just it's night and day different between being up on the balcony playing the Masters and then down on the floor, because everyone there had come from a tournament where they've basically gone 6-0, right, or something very close to it. And there's this understanding of like, you're one of the best players in your country, I'm one of the best players in my country. Let's just play this game as intended. Let's play it proper, declare everything, have a conversation while we're playing the game, and just have a really, honestly, just a fun time playing the game. Because when you have two players at that level, you almost kind of like do this weird mind melding thing where you kind of understand as your opponent's playing and doing their moves and talking to you what they're trying to do and what their intention is. So the clarification is just so simple. There's no argy bargy back and forth. It's just, oh yeah, you're staying out of range, so this rule doesn't proc. Sure, no worries. And then even when the table inevitably gets bumped, because Klutz like me bumps the table because her hands are shaking so much. We already know what's happening, and we already understand, how their combats are going and all that kind of stuff like that. So yeah, it's if anyone out there is aspiring to like play at that kind of level, try and get yourself a ticket to Masters, because I don't think there is any other tournament in the world that will come close to the atmosphere and camaraderie that you will get at the Masters event.
Yeah, that was one thing that really stuck out to me as well. It's a lot of the players also knew each other because you bump into each other
Mm,
at the top tables at other events, or they've heard of each other. In my case, some people recognize me from the content that I make. So
yeah,
there's a sense of camaraderie, and you want to have a good game, and you want to socialize, and you want
yeah,
to win,
100%.
but you want to earn the win, and you want to have a good game while doing so.
Yes.
And there's also a lot of understanding, like you know that your opponent is good at the game. You know that both you're going to play competitively, so there's no grudges or anything. It's just like, no, it's the
Yeah.
game. Of course, you make that decision. That's the smart move. Oh no, you got punished by dice, and then you comfort each other or whatever. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's a really nice atmosphere.
And one of the things too, like with the whole punishing of the dice, one thing I found is because the skill, like the skill difference between the players is it's razor thin, like it's almost negligible, pretty much every matchup. The games kind of weirdly come down to who can capitalize off a weird dice roll. Like suddenly, a model rolls a 6 on a jump test and somebody can swing in behind, and it's like, okay, who can react to that better? Or a key model that was holding a space just rolled a 1 off their thrown rider, dies, and now there's only a giant hole in the middle of your line, and it's like, okay, who can get into that gap? And it's just following up on these wacky interactions that are just so out in the way what you wouldn't normally expect in a game, what normal players wouldn't expect. And it's just with two top level players, you just watch it. Suddenly, chaos is thrown into the mix, and it's just everyone pouncing on top of each other, trying to like, either abuse the dice roll that's happened, or patch it up as quickly as possible. And that's what for me made the tournament, like it just made the tournament atmosphere just completely different, and the game's just so completely different from anything else I have ever experienced.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely notice that. Um, you don't even have to like hope or anticipate or try to
Mm,
surprise the other player. Like they'll see your plays coming because the plays that you're doing are the most logical plays and like statistically the best play that you should be
yeah,
doing with your army given the setup and the scenario. And it's not until like the lines clash and things get messy or dice do weird things where you get in these situations where you can try to like flip the script or try and surprise each other or whatever. But at the start
mm,
it's almost like chess. Like you start with a certain amount of moves and it's
yeah,
like, oh, it's expected, like you just kind of react to each other. And it's, I don't know. It also, I found that the starts of the games were usually pretty quickly because it was quite evident on
yeah,
like how you should deploy and what the best thing to do is. So that was quite nice.
mm,
And sometimes you'll find in tournaments where you have opponents that are really mulling everything over because they're not sure what to do against your list or in a given scenario. But with these players of this kind of level, they've kind of seen it all. So they kind of
yeah,
instinctively know how to react to a certain situation, just kind of get on with it and make the
mm.
move and go forward. So that's also really nice. Yeah.
100% agree with that too. And I think everyone there at the tournament too, like to harken back to a point you made, everyone there wanted to win their game because they were the better general.
Hmm.
There wasn't any of that like weird kind of like trying to like stall out a draw or cheese a win. It was like, no, I want to win because I'm better than you. And I think the fact that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone got less than 2 wins over the course of the tournament. Everyone got at least 2 wins. Everyone was taking games off everyone else
I
throughout the course of the
think so,
tournament.
but I have to admit I didn't
Yeah,
pay a lot of attention to the bottom tables, if I'm
yeah.
honest.
But yeah, it's kind of wild when you play an event like that where every player can take a game off every other player,
Yeah,
and it's not a roll of the dice or
yeah,
a luck based thing. It
yeah.
is straight up.
Because like I
That's
mean,
margin.
you went undefeated during the event. Like you won it all,
Mm.
but I think there were at least 2 games that were really
Oh
close to
yeah,
losing.
yes, yes.
Okay.
I can 100% say yes.
Okay.
There were some dicey moments where I had to like really come up with like Hail Marys and just crazy situations and just backing myself with every opportunity to get out of the hole. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, as you'll find out in this upcoming game, that this game was like on a knife edge.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what's thinner than a knife edge or a razor edge, but whatever that is, that's what we're on.
Yeah, yeah, basically. All right, let's set the scene a little bit for our listeners and viewers. So,
Mm,
Masters event, 18 players, they all qualify by beating a lot of other players basically and winning a major
yeah.
event. Um, we've done one day of games against top players from around the world.
Yes.
We've both been undefeated so far. We won all 3 of our games. So we face each other on at the start of day 2, and whoever of our game wins is the only person to go undefeated into the last 2 games. It doesn't mean that that person automatically
Yeah.
wins the event because they could still lose their next game and somebody else could go back over the top, but it definitely sets you up for success. So
Yeah. It becomes your tournament to lose, essentially,
basically,
from that
yeah,
point.
it's
Yeah.
really high stakes, and it's not like the main event at Ardacon where there's oaths or anything, or like Michael's event in Belfast where VP difference is tournament points. No, it's just win, draw, or loss, and then after that it's tiebreakers. So that's basically how the event is
Yeah.
scored. I think it's like 5 points
Yeah.
for a win or something, and three
Yeah.
for a draw or
It's like
two.
five for a win, two for a draw, zero for a loss, and then ties are broken by VP differential, and then after that, strength of schedule. So
Yeah,
it's every victory point you get matters because everything's so close. And we called at the start of the tournament like it is math. It will before the LCQ threw in an extra 2 players when we had 16. It was mathematically possible for someone to win the tournament on 4 wins, and then
yeah,
we worked out and going in was like, yeah, you can drop a game and still be fine going into this tournament, make a podium, and yeah, it was just honestly a bloodbath on pretty much every table, every round. And I know going into this one too, after coming off the 3 wins off day one, I was honestly, I don't think I've ever been more nervous to play a game than our game we had because we had been chatting during the course of the tournament a lot of like trading back and forth, trading ideas and stuff. So I was like, I knew the quality of you as a player, and I'd been next to you a couple of games, and I'd seen what you've been doing. I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that play of Dragon Emperor. That's too spooky for me. Like,
so
and then we drew, and I'm like, I was excited but nervous at the same time. There's two energies mixing together. And then we got Reconnoiter as our scenario, and I'm like, oh mate, this is that was a very interesting scenario for us to get.
yes, yes. So let's walk back a little bit because you're taking Assault on
Yeah.
Lothlorien. Could you maybe
Yes.
tell our listeners and viewers the list?
Yeah. So I won't go too much into warband composition and exact stuff. The list is out there for people to check. But the basic thing is I have Muzgar, Druzag, a Goblin Shaman, and an Orc Captain on Warg. There were 4 spiders in the list and 2 black swarms, as well as 10 prowlers, 6 trackers, 6 spears in there as well. So Goblin Bowman and I think 3 Warg Riders on with throwing spear and shield. So I had a lot to kind of like cover my bases and stuff. I could do a lot in a lot of different scenarios, and I have avenues to play through the game. But as we'll find out, your composition of Dragon Emperor really, really put me up for the test. Like I was having to pull stuff out of my bag I didn't even know I had.
Yeah, yeah. So interestingly, your list has had slightly less models than Lucas' list, who I
Hmm.
played the day before. He had like 54, 56 models or something. I think
Yeah,
your
I think
list
it
had
was like
40,
52 or something. I think it
oh,
was
52.
52.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
but you're in like low 40s, I think, with your list, right?
Yeah, I think it was 42 or 43. I can't
Yeah,
remember off the top of my head.
yeah.
But I had essentially favored taking more beasts than more goblins with, bows and throwing weapons, simply because I value the beast and being able to change up the angle from where the enraged beast is coming from,
Mhm.
which I'm not sure if it helped me too much in this game. It did a little bit. But yeah, as you'll see as we go through the game, there were a lot of really tough decisions to have to make throughout the course of this game from both of us.
Yeah, yeah. So on my list, as Kylie already mentioned, the Emperor Legion, the Emperor Brogear, and a Captain without shield, focusing on getting bodies. I think I had 36 models off the top of my head.
Hmm.
And lots of acolytes, and 9 acolytes in total, all with axes, 2 cataphracts, one with drum, also both with axes, and then a whole bunch of black dragon pikemen and some regular
Yeah,
pikes mixed in the captain and Brogear's warband. So yeah, I favor getting a captain over Rutabi on this points level to get some more bodies in to really make the
yeah.
most out of the Emperor boss. And in this scenario, and in most
And
scenarios,
it mattered.
honestly, I'm quite glad that I did because you really do need those bodies to try and maintain your opponent. Um,
Hmm.
so you mentioned earlier that we've been chatting a lot. When I found out I had to play against you, I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said so much and showed so much of my hand. But yeah,
Well, I will say just quickly, I am appreciative of those little chats we have because I have changed my US Nova Open list
hmm
to mimic some more of the style that you had. So I have picked up the captain basic basic with nothing, just the two-handed axe, and I have picked up Bro gear because yeah, you and Michael singing Bro gear's praise. I was like, all right, I got to try this out. Tried it at Worcester and I went,
yeah,
oh my God,
Brogear is
he's
the
a fun
shit.
model.
Brogear is
He is the
amazing.
shit. He
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
shit.
yeah.
I stand corrected on that one.
He's it's such a good offensive and defensive tool. Like just to tremor into an Emperor's combat when he's in trouble, it's just
Mm,
really nice. And some people just don't see it coming. Like they'll get like an enraged spider and a bat swarm into an emperor, and then they think he's dead, but then Brogear still can move, and he's just like,
yeah,
nope, and that just a turn wastes a turn and maybe even kills the spider if it takes a wound and then takes another wound from the enraged and it's just gone after that. It's like, it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
nice. But yeah, going into the game, I was feeling excited. First off, I was really excited
yeah.
just to play the game, really looking forward to it, but I also a bit hesitant because I didn't like the scenario for this particular
Mm,
matchup because
mm,
I do know that my force as a whole is more mobile because if we're trying to stick together, you're being slowed down by 5-inch move goblins, obviously.
yeah,
Whereas my
yeah,
infantry can move 9 inches with the drum, and if I use some marches, I can move even faster if I want to. But that's offset by the fact that you have spiders and bats, and especially the bats, there's no way I can stop them from getting off the board.
yeah,
And if you only get one model off the board while I'm still like in the middle, that really puts the pressure on me to, make a move or make a play or make something happen. And that's not a position I like being in. Like I like to be ahead
yeah,
so that I can control the way it flows. It's a thing that these things are
yeah.
very good at.
I'm exactly the same way with exactly the same thoughts and principles.
Yeah, so my game plan going in was like, okay, I need to move up as quickly as I can. I need to start fighting as quick as I can and hope to break you so that stuff starts running away. And hopefully I can then also get models off of the board before you're quartered. Hopefully more, but maybe just enough to keep that limited to 3 and then win it based on breaking and leader kills or something along those lines. That was basically the
Mm,
general game plan I had. Like, I need to move forward as much as possible, tie up all of your infantry
yeah,
force so that only maybe your cavalry and bats and stuff can get off the board. Um, yeah, so was kind of my general strategy going in. What did you have a game plan when we were deploying and
yeah.
setting up?
So I have a game plan that I like to dip into a lot with Reckoner, and this is the first time I've gone up against someone who actually was able to counter it in a fairly efficient macro manner. So I'm not sure. This is going to be a weird little tangent, but there's an old Fellowship Journey book scenario with the Dunedain fighting the Ringwraiths, and the Ringwraith's job is to get off the board.
Is that
The
the one
problem
where they
is
try to cross a river or something?
the one before it is
Okay.
literally the scenario before it. I think it's the very first one. But the trick in one of the tricks we found in this scenario is you go the race right up to the board edges, draw them all the way to the sides, and with the race on mobility, the Dunedain have to check it, and then you rush through the middle. So you run into the middle and then straight down the guts. And that has worked a lot for me in Reconnoiter. It helped me win Reconnoiter back home. It helped me win the Reconnoiter I won in 2019 against the Norwegians to get myself through. And I was hoping to replicate the same kind of strategy because I had a captain with March. I had Wild Bats and Spiders on my to kind of really abuse that speed factor through the middle as well. And I figured, well, if I get you, yeah, you might be able to chase, but I have just enough positioning and better quality troops running to the board edge that it's going to be harder for your drummed infantry to catch up and actually charge because you can't charge the turn you drum. So you can keep pace, but eventually there's going to be a turn where you have to not drum, and hopefully I can maybe one failed courage check here or there on a spider, and I can sneak models through. Definitely get the bat off that way too, and yeah, then it's onus on me to hold the line and stop you from getting moves past. But as I found out, that was a little bit of a miscalculation on my part because your macro play afterwards, even though you had basically your acolytes and your captain within 6 inches of your board edge, my God, they can move.
Yes, yes, they can. We'll find that out in a minute. So let's paint a picture of the battlefield. I think it was fairly symmetrical. On my side, in the
Mm,
middle, on my board edge, there was a field with two walls next to it. And then if we go
yeah,
towards the center of the board, there was a massive street through the middle that was kind of open,
yeah,
and with ruins on either side of it. On one side, the ruins were slightly larger, and then kind of next to that ruin, there was a forest. So there was terrain basically throughout the entire center except for this massive street in the middle, which was
yeah.
a big open space. And then I think, if I remember correctly, towards your side of the board, there was a forest in the middle, or
Yeah,
slightly
so
off.
basically that street, when it comes towards my side of the board, goes into like a Y split and peers off to the side. So
Hmm.
there was not any one point across the whole board where there was a straight line at the opposing board edge. You had to veer at some point to get around terrain features. And that would, for me, that was the key linchpin for my strategy because you had to pick one side to go with the wood. Wherever the Emperor went, he wasn't double backing on the other side of the wood. So I had to kind of like hedge my bets a little bit and make sure I guarded both sides and then hopefully get that refused flank and smash into your other flank and get in and crack those lines and stop you and hold you at the board edge, which was a much tougher ask than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, yeah, these things can punch through things if they really want to. So
Mm.
when the game started, I won priority and had to roll for my warbands first. I got quite lucky with the rolls. Every single warband came on without having to
Yes.
spend might, which was quite a big deal. I put the Emperor and Brogir towards the left side of the field where there was a little bit more space, and then the Captain Warband on the other side of the field to spread them out a
Yeah.
little bit. But everything was still within range of the drum, so I could move everything up that extra speed. But I think, if I remember correctly, only like two of your warbands came on without having to spend might, I
Yeah, so
think.
I was put in a really tough position because like I'm mapping it out in my head and going, well, move on first turn six, then two turns of drum, that's 18. You're over the halfway line. If you win priority and get the charge off, you're going to be charging me very close to my board edge. And if I don't get my warbands on now, I could be in a really tough spot where you're fighting within, say, 6 inches of my 6 to 10 inches of my board edge rather than the 18, which I was kind of more planning to have. So I bit the bullet. I spent a point of might with the Shaman and Drizag to get them on the board just to make sure that I could move up into this position because there was a tiny bit of a choke, but not a big choke between kind of these ruins that we had on the table and the forest I had. So I had to cover about 8 to 9 inches, maybe a bit more, maybe up to a foot of space that if they were going to punch through, that's the spot they were going to punch through because they're not going anywhere near the forests when their spiders are kind of anchoring them. So I figured it'd be down the guts, down the middle, and I just have to get that gun line, that throwing weapon line set up, ready to set and receive, and hopefully crack you before you can punch through.
Yeah. So you did this really important thing that I always try to hammer on people, like really think before deployment and like envision where are things going to clash,
Yeah,
what's the general game plan going to be. You calculated where I could end up after a certain amount of turns, and that influences your decision on whether or not spending might is a good idea. So I think you definitely made the right call there, because
Mm,
if you hadn't done that
100%.
and you came on a turn later, I think Dursak came on one turn later, if I remember correctly, because he was a little further
Yeah,
behind.
Drew's actually, yeah, I did spend the night with Drew's but that was the next turn I spent it because I
Yeah,
rolled terribly. But the first turn I wasn't as worried because he predominantly had a bulk of spiders with him, so he could catch up and actually reinforce the line. And he had a lot of the spears in that warband too, so they could meet up behind it.
yeah,
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 particularly for me, like doing the math in my head, I'm like, if I'm 5 turns, 5 inches back, that's no longer, an 8, 9 inch choke. That's now between the wood and the board edge, which is nearly 2 foot. And 2 foot is much harder to defend against than a 1 foot choke.
yeah,
So I knew I had the model count and the resources at that point to hold a 1 foot choke, so long as I could get the rest of my stuff moving and in position, and maybe even do some shenanigans where I have to pull your models back to check my models going off the table, which kind of worked for me and kind of didn't, as we'll kind of like discuss in a moment.
yeah,
But yeah, knowing and being able to pick where on the battlefield the fight's going to be and who has the initiative to dictate where that fight is going to be is a big skill to learn. And thankfully for me, it was a skill I have learned because I accurately predicted where that fight was going to be.
yep. And I basically saw what you were doing. I was like, okay, I'll bite. This is what the Eastlings do,
Mm,
right? They go somewhere and they
yeah,
fight. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. So basically, what happened in the first few turns is, I moved the Emperor's Warband and Brogir's extra forces up, not quite through the middle. I decided to go through the ruins with most of the force and a few infantry off to the side. So that was, I think that took 2, 3 turns, but in the meantime, we had a very
yeah,
interesting game of cat and mouse happening on the other side of the board, in the smaller
yes,
ruins, where you had moved your captain with 2, 3 other warg riders, a spider or two, and a bat, I think,
yes,
off into the ruins, and I had decided to, instead of moving the captain up with the rest of the Eastlings, to try and play this cat and mouse game and stop you from at least immediately running off the board with these troops, because
yeah,
I really didn't want to be in that position where, on turn 2 or 3 or whatever, I'm already a few models down. So we were doing this skirmish thing where, because I had the drum, I kind of had the same amount of mobility and could always
mm,
get into a position where I could threaten to charge the turn afterwards if you moved wrongly. And also, I think Acolyte's got some clutch throwing daggers on a single Warg Rider and just killed him.
yeah. I got one Warg Rider within range of the board edge, and if I had priority next turn, he's off.
Yeah,
Regardless of whether he got dismounted or what. So long as there was a Warg or an Orc there, he was off next turn. And yeah, the two acolytes, I went, well, they're on the move, they're fives to hit, and they hit, killed the Warg, and then the Warg Rider rolled a one and broke his neck on the
oh
floor.
yeah, I thought the Warg
And
ran
I
away,
was
but it was the
like,
other way around.
oh my god! I was just like, I was cacking myself because I let you roll the wound roll. I'm like, I should have rolled. I was rolling terrible at that point. And I was just like, oh damn, that was all my pressure.
Yeah,
And that's how those most of that force got within 6 inches of the back of the edge of the board. Was because that one Warg Rider. Because I decided to kind of like hedge my bets. I went deep with one Warg Rider, knowing he'd be hit, but there was a chance off the next turn's priority. I'd be in the position to sneak a guy off, and I think you had priority at that point, so I had a slightly better odds to get it on my turn next turn, and I backed off the captain, figuring, well, what do you do? Do you check the main force and let one guy go off, a guy that you probably can stop, or do you check the guy that's about to go off, and then let the Warg Riders and bats and spiders position? And yeah, you got those clutch throwing weapons playing to your outs, and it was yeah. When I saw that, I went yeah, yeah, well played, well
yep.
played, good check and counter
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, it really helped. There is also that +1 to wound, right? Because the orcs don't have the night
Mm,
vision, so it also hurts you. That the fact that I have throwing daggers and can
yeah,
just murder you on force, which was really nice.
that and it came in because that's what got the war kill was that clutch four too,
Yeah,
and yeah, that play on that whole thing, and I think too the captain going with that group. I think if there was anything that was going to win you the game, that was the play. That was the macro decision that you made to hold the captain back to keep them
yeah.
going and giving them moves and
Because
giving
I
them
figured that
options.
if I didn't do that, then there's no point at all to having the picket line, because you can just
Mm,
run up to me on a turn that you lose priority, and then next turn with your captain call a move, and there's nothing I can do about it. So then there's
yeah,
no point whatsoever in having a picket line. So I need that captain there, And then in the back of my head, I was always like, this is probably a losing proposition, but I need to stall for time. And then when you get past me, which you'll inevitably will, I'll just use the captain's might to move up
Mm.
across the board and join the emperor or join the fight that way or whatever. So I think,
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, go on. Oh, I was just going to say that was the mistake that I made, was miscalculating how quickly you were going to be breaking from my board edge with the captain, because I had basically gone, right, cool, you're out of the game now. You're basically on your edge of the board, um, within 6 inches. It's going to take you forever and a day to get back. Like, yeah, the drum march was going to be quick. 12 inches a turn, that's massive. That's 2 turns right there with the might points in the drum that you're able to match on the board. But I figured, me calling a march going down the guts, which is exactly what I said earlier, which was my plan, I'd be able to get my models off. And then what I kind of miscalculated a little bit was that essentially put me on a clock. And it meant I had to get you courted, which I was at this point a little confident I could possibly do, because had I was winning the main fight, and we'll go into what was going on in the main fight in a second. But I thought, yeah, 5 turns, 4 turns, that's going to be enough for me to win this game. It doesn't matter if a couple of those guys get off. If I get all my Warg Riders, my captain, the bat, and a couple of spiders, that won't matter, because I'll be off first, and they'll come off in drips and drabs. But yeah, that put a clock on the game for me, and that clock was massive because it really forced me to make aggressive decisions that probably didn't favor me as much as being able to play it slow.
Yeah. So I will say that what you did really well is that you didn't rush your models off immediately. You did take the time to dismount the Warg Riders
Mm.
to try and get the Wargs as well, which fortunately you did pass, I think, every single courage test for the
Every
Wargs
single
there.
one.
So that,
Yeah, an
I
extra
think,
3 models off. It's
yeah,
big.
in the end you got 8 models off. 7? No, 7. You got 7
Seven,
models
seven.
off over there. And I had 3 pikemen that had kind of chased you that way, and in the end they managed to stop a single spider from going off, which all the way towards the end of the game, which will
Yeah.
matter later. So we'll
Mm.
remember that. In the meantime, in the main fight, I had moved into you on a turn that I think that I lost priority. So you got some
Yes.
throwing daggers and some shots off. I think I lost like 2 acolytes or something along those lines.
Yeah, I
Not
picked
too
off. I
bad.
think I picked off like a guy and a couple of acolytes. Wasn't too bad. I think the big thing for me is I focused on the right side of your battle line,
Hmm.
which was the side where you had the more opportunity to like slip a guy through and break through, because that was where the weakest. So I focused on the side that was the weak point and made sure that your core around the Emperor had to go through the nitty gritty, the meat of all the goblins.
Yeah. So and then the following turn, I had priority and I was in charge range. And this is where I think I made the main mistake that I made during the
Mm.
game. I did charge with the Emperor and all of the acolytes and stuff around the Emperor, but I also had another group that went around the ruins and were a little bit further
The
back.
9-man
The
pike
the
block.
nine pike block in a
We
nice
salute thee.
3x3 formation, and they were just barely in charge range of your trackers. And behind your trackers, you had
Trackers. Yeah.
Druzak and a bunch of no Muskur.
Muska.
I always mix those two up, Muskur and a bunch of
I do too.
Spearmen
Don't worry about it.
and Banner and things like that. So it's like, well, I mean, I kind of have to charge now because if I don't, you're going to shoot at me. But I think what I should have done was just make a line and make it so that you could charge me if you wanted to, but at least it would have been not as unfavorable. So what happened instead is
Mm.
I charged you with this perfect 3x3 pike block because that's all the movement I had. It was like just 6 inches,
Mm.
and then you just wrapped around me and trapped every single thing. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is bad, but I have the higher fight value for in most of these fights, and I still in range of a banner with the Emperor. So if I shield and I just buy some time, it should be fine.
Mm.
But instead, I had a disastrous round of combat.
Oopsie, oopsie,
I
right. And I think too, the big part was the Emperor was out of range for his banner reroll on most of these combats, and I had my banner there because that's where Musgar was. The banner came with Musgar, so
no,
I was
he
able
was out
to.
of range for the fight buff, but he was definitely in range for the banner reroll. It just didn't matter because I rolled
Not
like
all of
shit.
them, not on the far left. The far
Really?
it was like half and half. Yeah, it was half and half.
Ah, okay.
And I kind of looked at that and went, "Oh, there's a kind of a little weak point on this corner," and I like went, I need to get kills on these guys as quickly as possible. So I called the heroic combat with Mosgar, threw a transfix over at the Emperor that just knocked off some will and stuff, and then really forced in to make sure that every combat in that little block, except for one, was a 2-to-1 my favor. So I had the +1 to wound going, and that +1 to wound or that came in clutch in those fights.
Yeah.
It was a bloodbath. I killed 6 of the 9 in the first round of combat, and this I think was another point where I made a slight poor macro decision making, which was I took the foot off the pedal a little bit. I saw 6 kills go down, and I'm like, yeah, cool. I can start dispersing. I started pulling models away from the combats, figuring, yeah, I can just leave, half the squad here to clean up these 3 Eastlings. And those 3 Eastlings, they survived so bloody long just shielding. And I should have kept Musgar there. I should have kept that fight going and kept making sure I ensured the kill, because
Yeah.
you weren't winning the combats on 6s. You're winning them on 4s and 5s, and just because I just couldn't chase in. And yeah, that cost me, I think, a lot of tempo that I had bought myself. So all this tempo that I bought myself, running my guys off the middle, cutting through the middle and then off, I basically squandered by not essentially kicking you while you were down.
Yep, you should have, because like that first round of combat, it also went really poorly near the Emperor. I just rolled like garbage. So I
Yeah,
think in the first round of combat in total, I lost 9 models, which is almost unheard of for
yeah,
Eastlings, especially against just
it was a lot
an
too.
assault on
And
Lothlorien
then
force.
yeah, and then to add insult to injury too, the next turn I won the heroic move off,
Yes.
and I got 3, 4 throwing weapon kills on the way in with the prowlers, and it was just like it was one like solid hit to the gut and then just a haymaker to the face. And I saw your face. That was actually, I think that was the turn where you had this look of bewilderment on you. And I think I asked you, do you need 2 minutes to look at the table? And this is where the comeback started,
Yeah.
because you said yes. And
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, man. I walked away from the table for 2 minutes, and you're just standing there, 2 meters back at the table looking at it. And I really want to hear your thoughts, because we briefly chatted about it, but not really went into depth.
Yeah, so for the listeners, at the Masters there's a little bar where there's like coffee and water and everything. So during a game you can go grab some stuff. So Kylie went off to do that, and I just literally took a few steps back and looked at the board from like a different angle. I was like, okay, so what is realistically going to happen here? I counted the models. I was like, okay, Kylie's gonna get 8 models off, and there's probably not much I can do about it. I think at that point I still had those 3 pikemen contesting some of them, so it was like maybe it'll be
Yeah.
7, but probably it's going to be 8, something along those lines. And like my picket line is going to move to the board edge. How many can get it off? Well, actually, maybe I can get like 6 from that group or something. So we're getting
Mm.
close. And I was like, okay, so the only thing that I can try and do is punch a hole with the Emperor, but I need to dismount because I need the models. So I need to
Yeah.
fight something, I need to kill something while calling heroic combat, dismount as part of the heroic combat so that next turn the dismounts can move, and then as part of the heroic combat kill more stuff to make a hole, and then still have might left over to call a move with the Emperor. And at that point, I don't think the Emperor had spent any might yet because Brogy had been calling the moves, so he had 3 might to
Yeah.
burn. So
Yeah.
that's basically also what happened during the games. It's like on the one side of the board, we have these acolytes, the captain and the cataphract drummer, that are still moving up the board, and you moved some of your forces that had previously slotted that little pike block off to the side to try and stop some of them. So some of those were fighting, but the others were going to get off the board, and there was not much you could do about that because you simply didn't
No.
have the mobility on that side of the board. There was a
Mm.
risk that I could actually get a leader wound there, depending on if I chose to engage Musgur rather than running off the board, but I made the decision to try and run as much off the board as possible,
Yeah.
um, simply because,
Which I think at that point was the correct play, but as we'll go into foresight, not knowing what was going to happen in the next 3, 4 turns, maybe chasing the leader win might have been important.
well, I mean, it turns out it was really important, but
Mm.
it shouldn't have
Yeah.
been, basically.
Yes.
Because at
Yes.
this point, also, I was definitely going to get broken, if not already broken. It was like
Yeah, I
really
think I think you
close.
were like 1 or 2 off, and some of the fights too were still like there was those 3 models in the middle that had been buying time, but they were still trapped, surrounded, and outnumbered. Two to three, three to
Yeah,
one kind of
yeah,
deal. So they're on a clock of, yeah, they're buying time, but they're going to die.
yeah.
And there was still the main fight too, where I could sneak a model and I had spider stuff and that left there. So you were going to get broken. It was just a matter of when. And yeah, this heroic combat, I think you threw an enchanted blades on the Emperor too, to pull it off,
Oh, I might
to,
have,
to, to
yeah.
ensure, yeah,
I
to
think so.
ensure, yeah, and you got the 6 off it too, which I got really annoyed about, on the refund, just because I was like, oh damn it, that's another Blade Wrath or another Tremor that's coming down. Bogey's still on his 1 more point. So I'm looking at that going, because you called the blade wrap and I'm like, oh, he's going for a heroic combat. I threw what was left of the kitchen sink at you, and then you just resisted the first transfix, used the point might to resist the second one, and yeah, that's luckily got that second might point off that resist because I mean you were committed at that point. The blade wrath was in there. You wanted that heroic combat, and there wasn't much I could do really to stop it because at that point, yeah, I'd done really well killing the models, but like I said, I didn't have a lot of goblins from the onset to hold that line, so I was kind of down to scraping the barrel. So the best I could do was move Drizak out of the way, try and block some space with a bat swarm, and hope.
Yep. So my problem at that point was that you were also really far off breaking, and breaking VPs are pretty significant in
Mm,
recon. And this is an unusual spot for me to be in because usually when I fight Assault on Lothlorien, like I'll break them. That's not really a question because it's a fragile army. Like things are going to
yeah,
die on both sides.
yeah. That's
Um,
one of the things I like about Assault on Lothlorien is you get hit really hard, but you hit really hard back, so things just die really quickly on
yeah,
both sides of the table.
yeah. But because the first round of combat went so abysmal, I actually had a really hard time breaking you. So at this point, I'm like, maybe actually the game plan is to quarter myself and get up more models off the board,
Yeah.
and then if my leader doesn't die or take a wound, we'll just have a draw. I get more models, that's 3 VPs, you break me without being broken, that's 3 VPs, then it's just a 3-3 draw,
Mm.
and I can live with that, with how awful the dice went. But as it turns out, that didn't quite happen. So I did get broken. I didn't manage to quarter myself quickly enough, but I did get quite a few models off of the board. But before that happened, you had put a single prowler in throwing dagger range the Emperor as he was running away,
Hero Prowler.
leading his guys, and I still had a single might point left because I figured I need this might point because I need to do a heroic move if I
Yeah.
lose priority to get these guys off the board guaranteed and not get tied up again because there was still a bad swarm I think lurking around and you had a
Yeah.
few models in charge range, so you still had enough stuff there to tie me up, and maybe I would have been able to get off the board a turn after that, but I was like, I'll need to save
Mm.
this might point. So you throw a dagger, you hit, you wound, and then I fail every single fate point, all three of them. And the
And
last one was a three, so I have to make this
yeah.
choice. Do I spend the might to prevent the leader wound? I'm like, well, I guess I don't because I need to get these models off the board. But
Mm.
as it turns out, when the dust settles, I have more models off the board. You break me, and I'm still one or two off breaking you, and I
Yeah.
have a leader wound, which means you actually win the game based on the single leader wound. And I did the math later, and it's like less than a percent chance of
Yes.
you hitting and wounding and me failing all three fate in a row. It's just it's
Yeah, and
stupid.
that one like to hit into wound two, the army bonus didn't come into effect. It was a straight six to hit,
Yep,
six to wound.
yep,
Roll your dice.
yep.
And yeah, that hero prowler, like I still know which prowler it is, and he is forever known as the Emperor Slayer
Well, he didn't
because
die, just took a
that
wound.
well, he likes to think he killed the Emperor. Goblins inflated ego. He saw his dagger through, drew blood. He's like, yeah, that's a kill. Not knowing, of course, it's the Emperor, and he's got wearing armor and has a lot more than just the one wound. But yeah, that I would not want to be in that decision of like to use the might because the might is guaranteed getting models off the board next turn, and most importantly, making sure you have that battlefield wide stand fast. That was
Yes.
so clutch because you taking courage tests on that last turn with every one of your models that close to the board edge, there's a non-insignificant amount of chance that you don't get the models that you need to get off the board. And as much as it pains, I think the might point being saved to guarantee the models going off the board next turn was the correct play because that stand fast was everything because that helped the far left flank where the captain and the drum had just drummed and marched all these models up the board and put the game on a time limit essentially. And that stand fast was what got half a dozen, well maybe not half a dozen, I think it was like three or four of those acolytes and the drum off the board to get that ball
Yeah.
rolling for you and
And
getting that number
it also
superiority.
meant that the pikeman that was holding back the one spider all the way on my side of the board also
Yeah,
passed courage test, and they still passed the courage test in order to charge the spider, but it's one less test that you have to take,
yeah,
so that also really helped on that side of the board.
yeah,
So yeah, no, I do stand
because
by a decision not to use the might point, but it's so annoying that I had to be
Mm.
in that position in the first place, because that ultimately made you win the game. I mean, there's obviously a lot more
Yeah,
that contributes to all of that. Also, the
yeah,
disastrous first round of combat and things like that.
yeah. And,
But
and I think
yeah,
too, it was I was really impressed because I stole this trick for the main event later. Was you're dismounting off the heroic combat to get extra models because what that also did was it buffered out your quarter point. Because at that point, I wasn't that many models off quartering. I was like 4 or 5 models from getting you to quarter, and I think I verbally said, "How many are you from quarter to end the game?" And then you said X amount, and then you dismounted that turn. I'm like, "Oh no, that's so many more models now that I need to kill." I don't think I've got the gas in the tank to kill 11 models now instead of what would have been, 4 or 5. That's a world of difference, particularly at that point. My army is spread out because we've clashed lines, we're running models off the board, everything is it's just skirmishes everywhere. So being in that position, I was like, damage control mode. Okay, what can I do? What can I do? All right, let's send the remainder of my spiders running to the board edge. Let's really make a pressure. And those 3 pikemen that we talked about were clutch because they were able to pass the courage test on the turn you want priority and get in front of the spider and win the combat. They didn't kill the spider. I think they put him on 1 wound, but specifically, just the act of getting in front of the spider was just enough to stop the spider from being able to skirt around and get on the board edge. And that could have been the game-winning play if the last round of combats had it gone your way.
yep, yeah, basically, because like, and when it does settle, you were like 1 or 2 models off of breaking as well, and that's another thing that people underestimate from dismounting the Emperor. If it's a really late game, dismounting the Emperor actually gives you more killing power than keeping him
Yeah,
on his feet and giving like the fight and banner bonus. Sometimes just having more models
it's huge.
is better. It's getting
Yeah,
traps or
I
getting,
mean,
making more even fights,
to quote Jeremy, the most powerful thing in the game is a single model on a 25 metal base. And
basically.
I think this game was a very good indicator of that because those 25 mil bases, not only were they like body blocking for the Emperor and stuff, but they were the models that were getting off the board. And yeah, into the last turn, it meant you had more chances to try and win that fight. And I think going into the last turn, you needed to kill like 22 to break me, and I was 20 square, and it was every combat mattered. And we knew we were going to run out of time, and it was kind of at that point too where the result was sort of kind of already like even if we had kept playing out, it could have swung either way still, but it came down to this turn worth of combat because if we played another turn, I could get the model off to equal out the thing, and you could have got the break. So yeah, these last round of combats were massive, and you started off well. The acolyte went in, got that kill that he needed, so it made you one. But every other combat after that, I don't think you rolled higher than a 4.
Nope. Nope, it was like the first round of combat all over again. Like I
Mm,
couldn't win anything to save my life. So it's a really disappointing feeling that like I can't even break a solo of Lorien. Like what's going on?
yeah,
Like that just tells you
particularly my
something,
assault and Lothlorien too, which had a much lower model count than most
right?
assault and Lothloriens do have.
Like it's not that hard to kill 20 odd goblins and
Mm,
orcs, especially not when you have basically the Emperor Legion to do it, and you only need fives to wound most of these things, and you have higher fight
yeah,
value, and you have banner rerolls coming out of your ass. Like you should be winning most of these fights and wounding, but it just wasn't happening. But I thoroughly enjoyed the game. Like it was tactical, basically from like turn two
yeah.
or three when the skirmish
I
started
wouldn't
with
even
like
say
the
to turn 3. I think it was tactical and strategic from turn 1 because I was in that position of having to throw might points down. You're in the position of where my
absolutely.
warbands come on and contest which parts of the board. So I think it's very rare where you get a game where the overall arching strategy is so important and the tactical, nuanced little micro rules interactions like the dismounting of the Emperor and and like the shenanigans with like Musgar resetting will and things like that. Those tiny little things, every little advantage that could be played in this scenario that both sides had were played. And I think just about every single special rule in this game was used in some way, shape, or form.
I think
And
the only
that was what,
one wasn't used. No, two actually. No, one. Because I did use the acolyte rule of like going over a thing on a 4+ and still being able to charge, because I could use that to
yeah,
charge Druzak, I think, at some point.
it was Musgar.
Musgar.
It was when you
Uh,
had the one attempt at Musgar,
right, yeah, that
and
didn't
then
work.
yeah, Musgar won the combat and
Yeah.
yeah, punched him in the
But
face and went get bugger
I
off.
don't think the only thing that didn't come up was acolytes not going prone on a 4+, because I don't think ever
Yeah,
an acolyte was charged by a walk rider.
But I would argue that it did have an effect on the game because that was part of the reason why I didn't commit the captain and the warg riders up that flank was
Mhm.
because you had six acolytes, and I was like, I don't know if I can crack through with them not being knocked down because I was relying heavily on the knockdown to create space and create basically a point where I run in, knock down, and now I've got that corridor where you can't quite reach anymore because you only got a 3-inch move. So that was what dissuading me from going in the first place. So
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
mean, you can still try it because you still wound on fours, and 2 dice to wound on fours is still 75% chance to kill something.
mm,
But it's not as surefire as 4 dice to wound
yeah,
and it's prone.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but I think also the main thing there is that I'm higher fight, other than your
yeah.
captain. Um, and I have 2 dice versus your 2 dice, so it's a hairy prospect to begin
It's
with.
yeah, it's only at that because I had marched to pull you kind of in that out of position moment to begin with. So I was down 1 might to 2. So going for that roll off, like if I had 2 roll offs in me, I'd probably take that gambit on the broad edge. But with only 1 roll off and 1 chance at glory, like I learned my lesson in 2018. Don't put the game on a 50-50.
No.
So I was like, nah, I'll play strategy out of this. And I think you called my bluff on that strategy because the macro on that flank with the marching down the flank and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I think was overall your game plan was just that fraction bit better than what I had. That my dice rolling was just that fraction a little bit better than your overall game plan, and that was, but again, that's what the game came down to was just a few pips here and there, and that's what ended the game. That one throwing weapon kill, those couple of extra combats where I got the kill, or those couple of extra combats where you didn't get the kill,
Yeah.
and I don't think I've ever in my entire life had a game that close
Yeah.
because that was
It
down to the
was
wire.
it
Doesn't
was
even
really.
describe how close it was.
I will be hard pressed to have a better game anytime soon. I think
Mm,
it
mm.
was just definitely. I wish we recorded it honestly.
Yeah, I wish that was
Maybe
on stream. To be honest,
maybe
yeah,
maybe next year I'll bring like a setup where I can like do a top-down recording of the board, so that you at least have some footage that you can do a voiceover of
yeah,
or something. But that was, yeah, really good. Like the only thing I would change of my game plan, I think, is not charging in the 3x3 pike block and just
yeah.
moving it kind of in your face, but in such a way that you can charge me, but not at least completely surround me, wrap
Mm.
around me, and maybe stay within 12 of the Emperor. But other than that, I still stand by all of the decisions I made, especially considering how poorly it went from the start
Mm.
and having to switch gears and go for like Plan D.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but I was cycling through plans pretty quick as well. I think I got up to plan E or F. At that point, there was a few times where I had to like switch macro modes, like after like the like. For me, I think it was a little bit different because yours was more damage control switching, and mine was more, oh shit, I'm killing so fast. I wasn't expecting to be this position this turn. So I was in these weird moments where I'm like, got the advantage. What do I do with it? And I don't think I quite capitalized as well as I probably should have off some of those advantage, which I think opened the door for you to have a real crack at winning the game, which you took with everything you had, which was yeah really impressive to see. And just
Yeah, because
yeah,
I think
I'm going to be remembering this game for a
I
while.
think you not sure there's that much you could have done differently, because if you throw more emperors, or sorry, more models at the emperor, I'll just kill more stuff and you run a very real
Yeah,
risk of breaking, because the emperor is just not going down to just a few things. Like you definitely need a
yeah,
spider and a
and
bat
you
swarm into the emperor in order to have a shot, and with
you were
Broger around.
wisely boxing that out and making sure you were in the position where you had peel, and it
Yes.
was going to be a monumental task for me to get that off. And I needed my spiders to do other things like run for the objective, uh, guard up flanks, and just be just a general threat. I think the only thing macro wise that I think I would have done differently is when the captain went for his march for the board edge, I didn't commit the spiders to that march as well, or maybe didn't commit the walk riders. Maybe only send few of those models for the board edge and kept some back because I desperately needed even just one spider to or one bat to like check those acolytes and just have that extra tanky model to be a threat, maybe get a kill or two, and just slow you down that extra turn or two that I desperately,
Yeah.
desperately needed to slow you
So
down with.
I think what you could have done, at some point you had a bat swarm on the small rune near the
Mm.
captain, right? When the little cat and mouse game was going on. I think on a turn that you lost priority, you should just flown that bat forward to a spot where I can't charge it the next turn and then just get it off the board and have one model off the board. And then I'm in
Yeah.
that situation where you no longer have to put pressure on me because the pressure's already on. You're winning at that point.
Yeah.
And then the Captain Warband, the Spiders, the Wargrides, etc., they can spend the rest of the game harassing my Warband or going back to the Emperor side of things, help kill there, and then swing back maybe on time. But that's a very big risk considering how fast I
Yeah.
can be with the March and Drum. But maybe having that warband putting the pressure on me to move forward. Because if I don't spend the
Mm.
might on the marches, I'm slower. I'm only moving 9 inches with those guys, and maybe that buys you enough time to then reinforce over there with a spider, get some enraged
Mm.
beasts, maybe that way kill some acolytes, thin that warband out enough that you can stop me from getting more models off the board. But it is a very big risk because if I do get
Yeah.
only two models
And I
off the
think,
board, then the pressure's
yeah,
on you again.
yeah, because it's interesting you say that too, because I'm not sure if you thought of it, but I was really worried about being top on the ruin because I didn't want to get stuck there. I was hyper aware of the +2 on the jump test and the climb test, and I was super worried because you did have some acolytes in sort of range of like, well, if you get a couple of strings of priority in your favor, acolyte goes up there, pins the bat, and like, yeah, I'm probably not going to die on the first turn or two, but with the might getting in range and just the move, you would have eventually just pinned and killed it. But I suppose you would be trading your might for that, which would have then given me the opportunity to be proactive back
Yeah,
at you, which I think was the next level of thinking I didn't quite jump to of like, okay, if he stops and spends the resources to stop the bat, where does that leave me in the
yeah.
game position rather than
The
me
problem
immediately
as
thinking, no,
well
I don't want to do that.
with that is that the acolytes do get the +2 on their climbing stuff, but climbing is still considered difficult terrain,
Mm.
and that rune is I think 2 inches high at least. So that's
It's
four.
2.5.
Yeah, so that's 5 inches of movement. So I need to be within 1 inch of the base of the rune to even be able to charge the bat, and
Yeah,
that's only if I roll a 4+. So it's a pretty tall
yeah.
order to accomplish.
Yeah, I think I was more worried about you just moving, getting up on one turn and then being able to charge the next.
Right.
I wasn't so much worried about the charge on the turn, on that specific turn. It was the next two, 3 turns down the ride when you had the might points to call the moves to force the charge that I was getting a little bit worried. And yeah, I don't know. I think definitely if I had a chance to replay like that portion of the board, I would definitely be a little bit more elusive with the bat and a bit more clever with the spiders and the terrain. Because I think the spider and the bat, especially around that field and that difficult terrain and the walls and the bat bill swarm being able to fly up top, there was definitely options for me to be able to navigate around the acolytes and around the captain. At least, at the very least, buy time, buy tempo, slow you down, force you to develop models that way, and then have the captain make his mad sprint to Warg Riders. And I mean, as we found out, I passed 2 courage tests on the board edge, so that's another 5, 6 models off the board.
Yep.
So that could have been enough, and I still would have kept the beast around to maybe hit back later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely is a very interesting game. Very few things that we could have or would have done differently. I think it's just
Mm,
yeah, reacting to how dice rolls play out in some crucial turns
mm.
and yeah,
Yeah, because I'm convinced if we played that game another 9 times, that the score would end up 4-2-4. Like we would just butt heads and it would just be a straight up you know well done skill matchup draw kind of a deal. And I just got a little bit lucky, quite literally, where the dice just said, "I'll give you a couple of extra pips where you need it, and you can take the win." So yeah, it's yeah, this was an amazing game, and I'll be thinking about this for a long time yet, and reviewing and reflecting, and honestly, using it as a teaching tool for a lot of my Padawans because there is a lot to be learned from this game, and particularly once I've like drawn it out and stuff too, I think a lot of players are going to learn a lot too.
mhm,
Because yeah, I think that'll be something really good for later in the work once I'm back home.
yeah. Well, happy to hear that. Happy I gave you a very tough matchup.
You gave me the toughest matchup of my entire career.
Well, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, like yeah, yeah. I can only think of one other game that was that sweaty and hard, and that was the semi final against Anarian in 2019. That's the only game that's pushed me that much and that sweaty. And I still think that this game just got over it in terms of sweatiness because that game was more just about punching each other in Lords of Battle. This one was strategic, tactical, and who's willing to take the risks,
Yeah.
take the help the long odds to get a lead. And yeah.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely fantastic. I think it's the hardest game I've played as well. It's really made me appreciate Recon more because I used to think this is kind of like a scenario where the
Mm.
army with more mobility usually wins. Um, but now I'm like, oh no, no, this was actually if Recon can give me games like this, I'll play it more.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. I knew I had a feeling this game going in because you had the drum, I had the beast, and the mobility through terrain. I knew this game was going to be like a straight up skill matchup. I didn't realize it was going to be this much of a skill matchup. So yeah, I'm really interested to see and hear other people's thoughts about how they went in the similar matchups against similar armies because I think it would be really interesting to see how other people navigate the fights and what other tools they may maybe take instead to see how they can change up the game. Because I
Yeah,
think Utabi would have made this game very different, and I think Ashrak would have made this game very different. And it's interesting that we neither of us took them, and I'd be interested to see how those two models in place of something else would have changed how the game went out.
I don't think if I had taken Ritabi, this would have been worse.
Mm,
Because that's 60 points of models that I lose.
yeah,
That's
it's
too
another
many that's too many bodies.
yeah
Like
five six
I either
guys.
have to
Yeah,
like downgrade a whole bunch of acolytes and still lose some models, or I have to lose like 7 models or
yeah,
something in order to get her. It's not worth it, especially not recon where every model counts. Because if I don't have the
mm,
acolytes, I don't have as much skirmish potential on a throwing dagger threat, especially in Clash by Moonlight rules for that Assault
yeah,
of Lorien
yeah.
brings. And then if I do take some acolytes but instead lose 7 pikes, I'm like, I mean, come on, what am I gonna do? Like, I would never have had enough
Yeah.
models to, kind of
Here's
check what you're doing.
here's a question for you. Would you ever consider downgrading a couple of acolytes to pick up some more horses?
Um, no.
Hmm, interesting.
In
Interesting.
Belfast, I had 5 cataphracts in total in my 800 point list, and I felt I never needed all 5 of them. I usually only really
Hmm.
needed 3 or 4. And I'm like, yeah, 2 is a little bit on the low side, but I'd rather have the acolytes over the cataphracts because the acolytes are consistently good, and the cataphracts are only good if you manage to charge. And sure, the cataphracts have 10-inch movement, but if you use the drum smart enough, any random pikeman has 9-inch movement. So you
Hmm.
don't need the cavalry in order to threaten like random objectives or whatever. You just send the drummer off that way with a buddy or two, and you're still good.
Hmm, interesting you're saying that because now you're making me want to think about tweaking my my Novacon list again, just to maybe drop some cataphracts and pick
Yeah.
up some more
Well,
guys.
like I will say that
Mm.
cataphracts with axes on the charge near the Emperor are absolute murder houses against defense 6 lists because they just charge into some stuff,
Yeah,
they roll the 6, they win, they knock stuff down, and they need 5s to wound when throwing 4 dice around. So
yeah,
they do work for relatively cheap as well because there's only 15 points in the Emperor's Warband or 17 points outside of it. Um, and they fill a large gap, right? So you can also use them to plug a
yeah,
hole or something that exists. But usually your game plan involves massive pike ranks to like through sheer weight of dice
yeah,
reliably win
yeah,
fights and then grind out that way. And my playstyle is ideally with acolytes on front of axes, so you still have that killing power, and then you have 4 dice to win a combat, 5 with the reroll at higher fight value, and you should be basically
yeah,
winning every fight. Um, so then I don't really need the cataphracts. It's like, what
yeah.
am I going to use them for? At least
Yeah,
around the
fair.
Emperor. So you only need them on the flanks, but if you're on the flanks, then, the single drummer, which I will never throw into combat until I no longer need the mobility, already does it enough.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting thought. I might have another relook at my Nova list again.
Yeah.
Try and squeeze out some
Like,
extra money because I'm
I,
currently packing like 5 cataphracts or something like that. So you're
like,
making me think maybe I don't pack that many.
it's also a preference thing because I don't think cataphracts are bad necessarily. I just
Hmm.
don't feel like I need them, and I can use the points for acolytes or just more bodies instead. I will say though that if the
Yeah,
drum was like smaller range, like 6-inch bubble or something, I'd definitely take more cataphracts.
yeah,
But because the drum is like this huge 12-inch thing, you can have these turns where it's like um, your main force is now engaging. Your drummer is still at the back, but it still hits some guys over here. It still hits some guys on the other flank. You're drumming. You move both of them 9 inches up, and then the drum goes with one of the two groups. But you've now achieved the mobility that you need to achieve, and
Yeah.
then it can move forward. So I've had opponents at Ardacon comment on my drum positioning that they thought it was what I was doing was silly but very effective, because I will do things where it's like, oh, the lines are about to clash. I'm going to move my drum here where he's exactly in the spot where he'll hit the back rank and pro gear, but he'll not hit the front rank, and he'll hit these guys over here that aren't in charge range yet. And it looks really weird having this guy go all the way behind your
Yeah.
army, right? Because like he's supposed to be supporting them or whatever, but he's like all the way back there just banging his drum and waving like, "Come on, guys, you can do it." But it's just the thing that's most effective, and
Mm.
having that 9-inch movement on your back rank can be very surprising to your opponent as well,
Yeah.
because you can psych them out. You're just like, oh, my front rank's charging, but my back rank's just fucking off around the building, and suddenly he's on in your flank, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't see that coming. I'm like, yeah, surprise. Or Brogier will just do his thing, where it's like, you part the lines, you make a gap for Brogier. Brogier moves 9 inches forward, 6-inch tremor, that's a 15-inch threat range, and then another potential 6
Yeah.
inches behind the tremor, to
Yeah.
where you potentially could hit
I
something 21 inches away. It's just
Yeah,
nuts.
I did use that trick because you told me about like these shenanigans with Brogier, Tremor, and the drum, and I did some math on it, and I pulled that one out in Worcester against Goblin Town, made that massive threat range with the drum, and yeah, it forced my opponent to go really wide and spread out to make the tremors not work as properly, and then I just went kill Blade Wrath on Bray Wrath on that guy. In we go. Rutabi just murdered like 4 guys into a captain, killed another guy as well. Like killed a captain, got the point back. So yeah, it's really great trick with the Brogier one. But yeah, the moving out around the flanks and stuff too. I'm
Yeah.
keeping that in my back pocket in my toolbox
Well,
because like I've learned so much with the Dragon. Like I've played the Dragon Emperor, but I've played it very differently to what you and Michael have, and Ardacon and stuff, and watching you guys play it and hearing your ideas and the thought processes. And have you, like, I think this is the key thing too. Have you guys properly explain how you're using certain abilities and how you're using the engages too? Has been really helpful for me, because yeah, it's. I thought I was good with the Dragon Emperor before. Uh, this has really kind of like humbled me a little bit in going, there's this army has a lot of skill expression. You just need to be willing to take the models to allow you to have that skill expression.
yeah, and it's also a bit of an annoyance on my end. There's a sentiment, right, where people are like, oh, it's the
Mm.
Dragon Emperor, like it's a low skill army. Of course you'll do well with it, and there's a small core of truth to it, because it's a fairly easy army to get the basics of right, because the basic premise of it
Yeah,
is fairly straightforward. It's not an army where you need to learn a bunch of things like Assault of Lorien, where it has lots of moving
yeah,
parts. But there's so many nitty-gritty little details to like list building, to how you approach different angles, to your positioning, which is absolutely key. Like not every Emperor player is going to grace the top table just by picking up the army, and by saying that it's an overpowered army and anyone that plays it can do well, it kind of diminishes the achievements of people that are
yeah,
doing well with it. And maybe there's some truth to the fact that it's overtuned at the moment, and maybe we'll see it tuned back down at the FAQ in February. Who knows? But
yeah.
in the meantime, saying that
Sorry.
people playing the Emperor are just winning because it's an overpowered legion, I think doesn't really quite do it justice.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about the shaky cam there, everyone. My battery just came up and pinged me. You are on 1% or about to wink out of existence.
Oh wow.
So I was like, probably should get that into a charger like now. Unfortunately for me, like all the chargers in this room are in the most awkward spaces. Like the desk is over here,
hmm
right? And I've had my phone like sitting up here. No PowerPoints. Like they're all like
Oh
the
wow.
cord doesn't reach. So I'm like, it's just a in. A really awkward position to be in. But yeah.
All right. Well, I think
Um,
we've gone off enough tangents, anyways. That maybe
yes.
we should work towards wrapping up the episode.
Yes,
Um,
probably.
any closing thoughts that you'd like to share on our master's experience at Ardacon this year?
Um, I think we've kind of really kind of covered everything. But I will say it has been an absolute privilege to play the top. players in the world in that kind of environment. And I know we said it earlier, but I feel like it's that important to like reiterate and most importantly kind of share, because I think this is something that the top level players in the community need to go out of their way to lead by example, to show. Because if the whole community can get to that kind of camaraderie, that kind of uh, there's no other way to describe it, but professionalism in a game, like the sky's the limit at that point. Because I mean, we've all seen like people getting angry at the dice and hissy fits thrown at tables, and the fact that none of that happened at the Masters event, none of that, there was no argy bargy, there was no negative play experiences. Everyone was there playing to win every game and to do well. And that to me was the thing that I took away the most from the Masters, regardless of everything else and the achievements I managed to pull off. It was seeing that, yeah, if we can lead the way in this particular aspect, the community is going to thrive because of it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I touched upon it in like the video I made for Belfast as well. It's like when you get to the top tables and you play against the best players, there's this understanding, and you just have really good games. But if you're like close to top tables, there's people trying to reach the top, and sometimes you encounter these people that are trying a little bit too hard, and they're
Yeah.
trying to take everything they can in order to win. They're like rules lawyering, or they're like, no, that model isn't within six, when clearly you tried to move within six, and things like that. It's like then when sometimes get these experiences where it's like it's less pleasant, and
Yes.
I really agree with you. Like I really hope that as a community we can go beyond that and be like, no, let's not rules lawyer these things. Like you know what the other player is intending to do. Don't try to win the game on a technicality. Try to win the game because you're playing better, or at the very
Yeah.
least, you create a situation in which the dice can reward you, because there's
Yeah.
always
And
some luck
and
involved.
yeah. And like with that as well, like when I think the step for those players that are in that position of about to break into the top tiers of this game, don't take that scrapping for everything. Don't take that step forward. I feel that's actually the step back, because it almost it puts a block in front of you of being able to almost not acknowledge your opponent's skill. And there's that kind of arrogant feeling of like, yeah, this is the point. Where I think if you take the other approach of like treating your opponents with respect, treating them with, the idea that they are as good as you and that they're a worthy opponent, and that both of you know fully well what's happening in the game and it's down to generalship. That's the step that's going to take you forward, because when you get into that mindset and that kind of thoughts into the game, you get into this position of like you're trying now to outthink rather than outcraft and be that crafty player. You're trying to be the better general, and it helps you be the better general. And I think a really good example of this is Evan Iverson from the US, because his journey over the past kind of since I last saw him in 2019, I was blown away with just how just how much of a professional he was at the table. And I hope that all the other players that are coming up through the ranks and are playing the game you know, take that example and play the same way, because there's no better feeling than when two players have play a game at that level and you walk away with both with a smile on your face regardless of the result. Because yeah, I mean, I had games exactly the same way down in the open when I copped losses, and it was like, I couldn't have played that any better. You couldn't have played that any better. That was just an absolute banger of a game. And yeah, I hope to see more players do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree there. I think for me, closing thoughts, I particularly enjoyed the Masters because going up to the Masters, I was still like, can I really dance with the best? Like, from
Yes.
like every country. Like Belfast was for me like maybe it was a fluke. Maybe I just got lucky. But I think the Masters really confirmed like no, I can definitely
Mm.
play on the same level, and at some point it's just about playing on a nice edge. A few more dice go your favor, you might win a game. If you dice don't go your favor, you lose the
Mm.
game, and that's really reassuring to see that you can get to that level. But it's really pleasant experience. It's really nice playing games in that level, and thoroughly enjoyable. So for anyone watching, anyone listening, go play in these tournaments. Go play at qualifiers. Go play at large open events. Because you'll become a better player for it, and it's also just really enjoyable to play against these people from all across the world, or from maybe all across Australia or whatever, because like not everyone can fly out everywhere, of course.
Yeah.
But it's just really nice meeting these people, learning new things, and just becoming a better player through it. And then it also gives, at least in my case, a new and more appreciation for the hobby as well, seeing all of these different strategies and these different takes on armies, and it's just, yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. It always inspires me to try out more armies and new things.
Yeah, definitely 100%.
All right, amazing. Well, I think that should be a wrap. We've been talking
Yeah,
enough
that should be a
enough now.
good wrap up point.
So
Not meaning to hide.
I don't
Go on.
actually have like a closing thing that I say for these kind of things. So I guess have a good
I do.
night.
I have a closing thing that I say at the end of every episode. It's very synonymous with our podcast. It's traps win games.
And they absolutely did in our game as well. So thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.